Right. So it's just about 10. So I am going to get started and I have a chat window open. So if anybody has any questions at any point, you are welcome to type them into the chat. And I am going to, for right now, mute everybody other than myself, just so that we don't have any background noise. I'm sure everybody's becoming an expert on Zoom. And how all this works. So welcome, my name is Dr. Sarah Boylan. I'm a clinical psychologist and I am in Northwest Montana. I'm not sure if any of you have ever been to Montana, but it is a beautiful place. But today it is 47 degrees and raining. So I hope you are all somewhere warmer and more welcoming to being outside. So I'm gonna just speak for about 30 minutes today or less, depending on how many questions there are, about a program that we're running up here that we've been doing for some time, but I think in light of the COVID pandemic, might be of use to some of your clients. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody knew about it. So thanks for joining. And I'd love it if everybody could just type into the chat where you're from and if you have any questions that you'd like to make sure I address before we even get going. And then I will dive in. So here we go. So Therapeutic Assessment Vacations, and I realize it's not the best name. Marketing is not really my specialty. I'm a clinical psychologist and I do that very well. So I'm always open to feedback on that piece. But so Therapeutic Assessment Vacations kind of started as a result of my passion for therapeutic assessment and the nature of the place where we live, which is pretty incredible. And over the past few years, I've had clients reach out from all over the country, Seattle, New York, Texas, who were looking for an opportunity to engage in a therapeutic assessment, but of course weren't located in Whitefish. So, and thanks everybody for chiming in on the chat. It's great to see you all. I appreciate that. So they were looking for a way to do this really intensive, really transformative experience, given that they were far away. And so we started just saying, yeah, come on out, have a week, find yourself a hotel or an Airbnb, and we'll do this therapeutic assessment process together. And over the last couple of years, I started realizing like, wow, we're actually missing out on some other great opportunities. So that's the origin story. So therapeutic assessment is, as you can see, a brief intervention that uses psychological assessments to help people change their lives. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with what a psychological assessment is. So therapeutic assessment was founded by Stephen Finn and some others down in Austin, Texas. And assessment in general is this process by which we try and understand a person a little bit better using psychological assessments. And for many people who have undergone a psychological assessment, they walk away with little change happening. There's knowledge gained. Primarily that knowledge is for the referring professional or for the treatment provider, but the individual themselves kind of just goes through the process without really learning a whole lot. And so Stephen Finn decided that he really wanted to take a more collaborative approach to the assessment process. So the way that the assessment process works is that we sit down with our clients in the first session and we say, what do you want to know about yourself? And here's what the referring professional, whether that's your doctor, your therapist, your educational consultant, your parent, your teacher, this is what they want to know. What do you want to know? And then combining those, we generate a list of referral questions, assessment questions, and that's going to guide our assessment. So if somebody asks a question about, what's the horsepower in my brain, that's another way of saying IQ, then we're going to do some IQ testing. But if nobody's really interested in that, we're not going to do it. So we really tailor the assessment process specifically for the individual or the family and the questions that are being asked. And then we do the assessment just as anybody else would. So we have, we use all the standardized measures. We're not changing anything in that process. But when we're done with those assessment measures, we go back to the person and we say, hey, look what we learned. How do you think this relates to that question that you asked? Or, gosh, I really want to ask you about these questions on the MMPI because you answered them in a really interesting way. And I want, you to have some time to tell me what you know about this. And so, sorry, I didn't mean to touch that. So, and then after we've generated all the data and we've engaged in these conversations kind of every step of the way, we do what's known as an assessment intervention. And we sit with the person and we show them through some kind of interactive, experiential means what their dilemma of change is, what the answer is, and to those questions. And then we invite them to actually try something different in that very meeting. And then we have a feedback session with the individual, with the family, with the referring professional, etc. We invite everybody. And it's very like jargon free, very focused on just helping them understand the answers. And then usually within a week or two, we have a follow-up written answer. And rather than it being a technical formal report, it's usually in the form of a letter. So, dear Susie, in the beginning of the assessment, your parents wanted to know X, Y, and Z, your educational consultant wanted to know Y, and you wanted to know A, B, and C. Here are the answers. And it's usually a 5 to 10 page letter that's really clear. It contains all the data just like a report does, but it's just really easy to read. And I will say I've had individuals go through these assessments and 5 years later they say, hey, look, I still carry this letter around with me, or I went back to that letter that you wrote and I reread it so that I'm really understanding what's going on right now. And generally speaking, the assessment process is very similar to a standard assessment. It just usually has a little bit extra time woven in. So that's therapeutic assessment. And then I'll talk a little bit about the benefits. So there's a ton of research coming out about therapeutic assessment. And the two biggest ones that I think you'd be most interested in is that it generally seems to make people more ready for change. And it makes them a little more open to treatment interventions moving forward. It also improves hope. So I'm doing a week-long assessment currently. I've got one of these therapeutic assessment vacations going right now. And yesterday at the end of the session, the 17-year-old turned to me and said, like, nothing's ever worked for me. And I'm starting to feel this new feeling. And I think it's called hope. And I was like, man, sometimes you just get those quotes and you're like, wow, I want to write that one down. But it really, because you're engaging the client in this way, they really start to feel something shift even in that moment. And they start to get more curious. They feel involved. They feel engaged in the process. And so even kind of some, really resistant folks might feel that shift. And this can happen before treatment. It can happen in the middle of treatment. It can happen after years of treatment. I've done this with my own clients who have been in treatment who haven't been getting better, or other folks in our practice. So it doesn't just have to be kind of at the beginning. So now let's just talk about kind of what this is. So we're taking this therapeutic assessment, we're compacting it down into like an 8-day process. And we're reframing the experience. So rather than getting sent away or, going off to wilderness, like, this is a vacation. We're going to invite the whole family if they want to come. If it's a young adult, maybe they come alone. And we're going to also kind of do a whole person kind of approach. We have an acupuncturist, yoga teachers, meditation experts, and a whole host of outdoor activities that we put the participant through a kind of questionnaire at the beginning, and we say, what are your interests? What do you think would be helpful to you? And then we select, kind of a list of activities. And then there's plenty of downtime, so they can just go for walks, go out to dinner, etc. And basically everything except for food is included in this process. So, who is the ideal participant? Um, so, when I was working at Montana Academy, there were a lot of kids there who there was a big component that was a family dynamic. And these are the folks that I'm really interested in working with in the therapeutic assessment vacation program. So, families where the kid has really been struggling for some time, but they're not kind of like way off the deep end, but maybe there's some resistance. Therapy hasn't really worked. Maybe the parents have resistance. Maybe the teenager has resistance. And again, that's where that reframe comes in. So this isn't like getting sent away or, going to this boot camp kind of experience. I'm using their words, right? Not mine. But this is an opportunity like, let's go on a ski vacation week to Montana and let's engage in this process as we do that. So it's kind of like pulling the family all back together. Um, so somebody had asked, Ellen, you had asked, what about resistant clients? So clients with real significant behavioral issues, right? Wilderness is going to be a much more appropriate setting for them because we're not containing them. We're not offering kind of around the clock supervision. These are kids who are kind of in that realm. And, I'm thinking of girls who are acting in as opposed to acting out, or, boys who have kind of like just really fallen away. They're playing video games all the time. They're just not engaging. But I'm not picturing kids who are running away or really engaging in self-injurious or really concerning behaviors. We're just not equipped, and that's not what it's designed for. The other group that this has really proven helpful with are young adults. So these might have been kiddos who went through treatment at some point, but it's also just folks who are kind of struggling to like find their way. And many of the people who we've worked with here are in this age group. So kind of the 18 to 25, and maybe they went to college, maybe they didn't, but they're having a really hard time kind of like finding their footing. And therapeutic assessment is great because it really enlists their help. So it's not being done to them. They really have to engage. They really have to be willing to show up. And then, I kind of said this already. So kind of that they're not quite in that like high acuity realm, but, so they're able to engage, they're able to stay safe, etc. There needs to be some willingness. And usually with adolescents and young adults, I'll do an introductory phone call or Zoom call. And I find that after that phone call, even just by sort of shifting gears and saying like, here, I'm going to engage you, you're going to get to guide the process, I'm really empowering them. Usually by the time we wrap up that phone call, they're a little more willing. They might still be skeptical, but they're more willing. So yes, in general, the folks need to be somewhat willing, right? They need to be able to stay safe, at least on a basic level, and there needs to be engagement, or willingness. So now let's talk a little bit about the process. So the process is really custom. Generally speaking, it's an 8-day program. Typically, we run them like a Wednesday to Wednesday. This one we're doing Saturday to Sunday just because of the family's needs. So it's really customizable. And we have an individualized enrollment process. So the educational consultant or therapist or parent reaches out to us, and then our program coordinator, Galen, circles back around and makes sure that we get the information that we need in order to make sure that they're good candidates. Usually it involves some, Zoom or phone call to kind of assess that. And then we schedule dates and we move from there. Right now, for example, we're scheduling into July. So it's not a huge delay. And then sometimes we can squeeze in, it just sort of depends. And like the kiddo who's here right now, we just scheduled last week. Things are all really wonky because of COVID, obviously. So in terms of turnaround for testing, it sort of depends. But I would say within a month, we can usually get people up here. And then they move through the week. And for many of them, like we're thinking 3 hours a day or 4 hours a day is kind of occupied. So either with yoga, meditation, or an outdoor activity or acupuncture or the testing itself. And there's usually at least one day during the week where they don't have any involvement with us because I'm collecting all the data or our postdoc is collecting all the data, and we need a day to process all that data so that we can have feedback for them on their final day here. And the cost, so typically the program, the full kind of including lodging and everything, runs $10,000. And if folks want to come up and kind of just do the assessment process, it's $5,000. The reason for the increase in price is that I typically have to cancel all my other clients so that I can do this during the week, or some of our other providers who do these as well. And then we're providing kind of all these additional services. So I think I ran through in my fast talking New York way. Yeah, so that's a great question, Marla. Thanks. So the cost is for the therapeutic assessment vacation. So if a family is doing the assessment, it's still going to be the same cost. The only reason that the cost would increase is if there's like a level of like that they're requesting more sort of from us. So, oh, we really want to dive deep into this or that. But generally speaking, that's the cost for the entire family, or if it's a couple, or if it's an individual. Because generally speaking, the testing process looks pretty similar. So those are great questions. And I hope I've sort of outlined the program pretty clearly, but I welcome any other questions. And I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody so that if you have any questions, you're welcome to answer them. Clients on the spectrum, great. So we do not do autism testing in this process. And part of the reason for that is that we are sort of looking for clients who have some level of insight and some ability to do insight. And it's not my area of expertise. One of our providers, Jordan, actually does work with autism. And so if these were higher functioning kids on the spectrum, I actually imagine we could accommodate them. She's on maternity leave until September. So right now it's not possible. And yes, I do. I can easily redact a report and send it out to you, Marla. That's a great question. And like I said, these are therapeutic assessment letters. So they're, you will see that I tend to use the people's actual language. You know, so if they refer to their depression as like a monster, you're going to see that word used throughout. And it's going to feel a lot less like a kind of formal assessment report. We do these assessments here regularly for clients in our local region, and the school districts, the psychiatrists, all the therapists are very accustomed to getting our reports. And the feedback we generally get is that it's actually much more helpful than a standardized report. I think initially we get some resistance because folks are used to kind of seeing a standard report, but ultimately we find that people have a much more easy time understanding them. Other interventions prior to coming with you. Yes, so great question. I would say the bulk of the individuals have been at least to some therapy. I would say like half of the people who go through this program have been in a lot of therapy, or they've tried multiple things. So they've tried psychiatric intervention, they've tried some sort of, you know, program or therapeutic intervention. But some have not. Like the person I'm testing currently, you know, she's kind of dabbled in therapy, but the family's actually been quite resistant to therapy in the past. And so in some ways, this is sort of new for them. In terms of prior testing, so we can integrate prior testing, or we can start over from scratch depending on how old the testing is. And, you know, as I'm sure you're all aware, like a lot of the testing you can repeat as long as it's been a certain amount of time. But many of the tests, so we use a lot of projective and personality tests in addition to like standard IQ, et cetera. But we use an adult attachment projective. So we look at attachment and we really kind of try to figure out that, especially if we're looking at family dynamics. We use the MMPI a lot. We use something called the early memories procedure. We use the Rorschach. And then in addition to kind of all those other tests that we're looking at, you know, the WAIS, the WISC, Connor's performance tests, the DCAPs, et cetera. So we have gone to test in other locations. The cost goes up somewhat just because it's a burden on our people. So the local airport is Kalispell. It's Glacier International Airport. It is international. There's direct flights, I think, to California, Denver, Seattle, Minneapolis, New York City, and I think Texas also. Right now, tickets are really cheap. And what we typically do as part of the initial survey is we ask, would folks rather stay in a hotel or more like a VRBO? And that's like personal preference. We've had people bring their dogs, so of course we have to accommodate that. And, you know, they fly in and then they're typically kind of using Uber or a taxi to get into the town of Whitefish. And then for the most part, if you're staying in Whitefish, you can walk everywhere. But of course, if they're going skiing or doing other things, they might want to rent a car. Okay, so great question about substance use. So again, if we're in a level of severity where the individual is unable to maintain sobriety, even for the duration of our evaluation, they would probably not be appropriate. That would be somebody that we'd probably want to see go to wilderness and have the assessment done 15, 30 days into the wilderness therapy program. But individuals who have been using and who can refrain throughout the duration of our program, we can still collect some pretty good data on them. And, you know, as long as they're not actively using currently. These are great questions. I really appreciate this dialogue. Yeah. Okay. So Marla asked a really good question. So you have the whole family. So you're doing any assessments or very depthful conversations with the family. What's the contribution? So typically, I have found that parents are pretty focused on the child, right? They think that the child is kind of the issue and they want to focus on that. And we at least usually have both parents, if there are two parents involved. Sometimes there's only one, sometimes they have kids at home, so only one parent will come out for the assessment. We at least have them do an MMPI, and that gives us some basic information about their personality. I remember a case about 2 years ago where the MMPI revealed that the dad had profound depression that no one in the family really knew about, including the father. And so it gave us this amazing insight that we were then able to talk about. And the beauty of the therapeutic assessment process is that, again, we're enrolling the help of the client. Like, we're not sort of saying, I'm the expert and you're over there and I'm going to tell you everything. So we're really being curious every step of the way. Like, gosh, I see all this anxiety in your MMPI. Like, what do you think that's about? What do you think that, you know, effect is on your child? How do you think that affects your family system? And so we really do engage the parents as much as they are able. And obviously, sometimes the parents are just as resistant as the kids, if not more so. And so we try to honor that. But we usually, by the end of the week, find a way for the kid to be able to say to the parent what needs to be said. And this kind of segues right into the next question about aftercare, Ellen. Thank you. We have had folks, generally speaking, we then refer them to therapy, or it might be appropriate, you know, maybe kind of they're already on track towards a therapeutic school or even just a regular boarding school. And we like to have conversations with the therapist that they'll be transitioning to. Again, they will go with this letter, so they'll have this way of sharing all of this information. And then we usually are outlining in our questions. I almost always try to push families or individuals to have some question in our list of assessment questions that's about the future. So usually the question sounds something like, what do we do? Or where do we go from here? And that gives us a really nice opportunity to kind of say, here's what we think you need moving forward. And again, because therapeutic assessment really readies people for change and treatment, we often think that's excellent, kind of starting place. And then I suspect if you were the referring providers, throughout that week we'd be having conversations about, here's where I think this is going, here's what I think they're going to need, and then you can be working to kind of assemble all of that or find appropriate options for them moving forward. So great questions so far. I really appreciate everybody participating. Does anybody else have any other questions before we wrap up? Kind of right at close to time. And if you have any clients that you think might be appropriate, just send me an email and we can talk it through. I know it's a different sort of program, but I think it's a really good one. So uh, you'll let me know. All right. Well, thanks everybody so much for showing up with me today. And it was lovely to kind of meet you all in this context. And I look forward to talking with you all soon, whenever that is. All right. You're very welcome, everybody. Thank you.